It's going to take a second. It's going to take a second. Oh, all right. Well, good evening, everybody. I am so excited to be in this listening space right now. My name is Jay Ponteri, and I'm the director of Low Residency Creative Writing. And tonight we have Diana Khoi Nguyen reading, and then gonna take some questions after Diana's reading. Diana gave such an amazing class today. We're just all filled with such a wonderful way of thinking and looking at text and image. And yeah, thank you so much, Diana. So I would like to introduce Low Residency Creative Writing 2023 Thesis Award winner, Diana Oropeza.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. A poet and multimedia artist, Diana Khoi Nguyen is the author of Ghost of, which was a finalist for the National Book Award, and forthcoming collection, Root Fractures. Nguyen is a Kundiman Fellow and member of the Vietnamese artist collective, She Who Has No Masters, a recipient of a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, and winner of the 92Y Discovery Poetry Contest and 2019 Kate Tufts Discovery Award. She currently teaches in the Randolph College Low Residency MFA and is an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Please welcome Diana Khoi Nguyen.
Thanks, Diana. So good to be here. Thank you, Jay, also for having me at PNCA. I always keep doing like the wrong acronym in my all the files that I was saving, because there's this thing at my school that's like PWCA. Anyway, so acronyms are bad. So just really grateful to be here. So happy to be listening and chatting with folks in that workshop. I wish I could have poured over the shoulders of everybody in a non-creepy way virtually, just to see what you were all tinkering and making. So since you all were in the workshop, at least, so the workshop, for folks who weren't there, we were looking at examples in poetry primarily, but also in fiction and nonfiction, where folks are also kind of incorporating images, photographic images, images in some fashion, a visual component in addition to the kind of textual component. So I think to that end, it makes sense for me to also share my own engagement and how I've been thinking and manifesting that. So I'm going to do a little kind of tour of my work. I'll start with a few poems from Ghost of, and then I'll share with you what I've been doing since then, which actually coincidentally is work that's going to be in this forthcoming book. Yeah, just so happy, really happy to be here. Happy to see familiar names, folks from the past, and then folks from the present and also in the future. And I said this already before we started, but if anybody has requests in terms of what you'd like for me to read, you might put that in the chat, either as direct message or not. If I feel up for it, I will do it. I never asked before, but why not? Because on Zoom, you could do that. Okay, so here we go. A bird in Chile and elsewhere. There's no ecologically safe way to mourn. Some plants have nectaries that keep secreting pollen, even after the petals have gone. Like a flower that grows only in the invisible, the whole world of its body noiselessly shaking against the dust. A necessary death in broad daylight. Alone in my seat of the roller coaster, I seemed to be sitting in a church. The dead cannot distinguish. One female monkey with a resigned look of love and another engaged in breastfeeding. Even the lion licked the smooth head of a lioness. I must not be consoled. Suppose the person in me is a better mother of the author of a book I wrote. You appear in a world which sees no danger in being nude, digging in the earth for black water, finding passage in hard soil because you no longer need to find yourself. A successful suicide, that's the phrase, is when the mother requests of her surviving daughters that they suppress joy over their lunches just before she removes her dead son's slippers from my feet, replacing them with others. Because despite everything, you hadn't lost your hunger, eh? Where I was young, where I was treated like a boy, where I was intelligent. He was alone in containing his violence. Is it not useless to pursue for its own sake the urgency of a previous day? I loathe it, the likeness of a brother living in the likeness of a body, with lips and hands and eyes that keep nothing in, nothing out. I would give you my other face to touch. I love them, the likeness of a woman, in her arms the likeness of a child. Once more, I began to move in the direction of the animals. If you're new to my work, just wanted to share a couple things. So the book Ghost Stuff primarily kind of engages and grapples with grief in the kind of first year and a half of my brother's death. He took his life in 2014 in the garage of my parents' house, but it was also his, where he lived from birth to his death. And I escaped that house when I turned 18. And my sister actually only finally moved out of that house at the age of 33 in the middle of the pandemic, which is my kind of shorthand way of saying that there was a lot going on in this family, in my family. There's a lot of survivor's guilt that I don't really talk explicitly about. And I think chiefly that I'll share here is really like, my mother, I see her and view her, but my father too, but he was indirect, but my mother is the primary abuser in my family. Okay, so I'm just gonna check. Wow, nobody wanted to request a poem, so cool, that's okay. I'm just gonna read one more and then I'll move to kind of like the PowerPoint slides that I have here. Sounds very corporate, PowerPoint slides. But the poet Eloisa Amaskua, I've totally seen her give readings where the poems are in PowerPoint and then like they're animated, but not in a cheesy way. It's really stunning. So we too can reclaim all kinds of spaces. I'm sure you already knew that. Let's see, just trying to find the one that I want to read here. Okay. An empty house is a debt. 1. There is a house in me. It is empty. I empty it. Negative space, the only native emptiness there is. There is 2. An alarm goes off. It goes on and on. When the alarm drifts to different parts of the room, I realize that alarm is the sun. 3. And there is no one who does not need, never an empty seat. And the blind one, he does not find a place. There is a God in him, helping him to need himself. 4. A mother sticks a spoon into my chest, which is an empty bowl, actually. So the spoon lands quickly and loudly. Heartbreak in the heart, she says. 5. I reach inside my empty house as far as I'm allowed to go. I reach outside my empty house as far as I'm allowed to go. 6. Or don't love me. What do I care? I'm tired of feeling guilty. I'm tired of running up a tab. I want to run outside with a sack of huge penises on my back into the empty houses of ex-lovers, of mothers, birds screaming out my name. A human terrifies. A human is someone who becomes terrified, and having become terrified, craves an end to her fear. This craving carves a cave. 7. What is a maze if there is nothing to find in the maze? I find myself angry at nothing. 8. My lovers bow before me as though before Medusa. Tell them you love them. See what they say. Or say it to yourself and see what you say. When you love someone more than you've ever known you could, it is a good thing, except for the terrifying realization that one day there comes a parting. Okay, so Roz is asking about Kyotaku on page 53. Let me see here. And then Mika is asking about She Who Has No Masters. Yes, I am going to read something that's related to She Who Has No Masters thing. Okay, let me see page 53. That's the eel. Yeah, sure, why not? I don't think I'm going to read all parts or segments of the eel. I think I should probably share my screen just so folks can see what I'm looking at here. Okay, so hold on. And then I'm going to move my PowerPoint slides. Let's see. So this is from Kyotaku, and Kyotaku is a Japanese form of printing, of capturing what you captured. So, like fish. So fish are people who, catch big fish. This is before photography, but this is still a practice that happens today. You would take the fish, paint one side with sumo ink or some other ink, and then press it against paper or fabric. And that's how you got, you got to preserve the size of your catch. And so I love thinking about the dead body as a stamp, right? So I played around with that, and I was really obsessed with eels. We can talk about this during after the reading, if there's a Q&A kind of part, but I was thinking a lot about eels, in particular, the adolescent stage of the eel, which is called Elver. And when I think of Elver, I hear my brother's name, which was Oliver. So I'm just going to read the parts that is repeated here, if I can actually read it. The Elver moves as fast forward as backward. On the road, he thinks forward, thinks back. The young one, growing still, frightened, he does not play dead. Try this new thing out. Yes, Poupeh, dead body is a stamp. I can't stop thinking about that. Okay. In the workshop, I talked about penicillin and happy accidents. And I always put this as my title page for any PowerPoint that I'm doing, because this is a happy accident. I found home video archives of my family. I mean, I knew we had them, I just didn't remember. Maybe a year or two after my brother's death. And then I got them digitized, and then I started kind of going through them, and mostly out of curiosity for what did I remember, but what the quote record actually show. And then the other thing too was I wanted to see my brother alive again, moving, animated. And this is the part where we're playing in a park. I'm the person here, the taller one that's like facing towards the left. And my brother is actually like walking towards this drain. He had a habit of kind of following wherever I went. And then, when you like move, when you're like doing video editing, and if you move like the cursor really slowly, sometimes the images like overlap each other and they get kind of pixelated. So this is one of those moments. And I really like this idea of like the two of us converge to one place over a drain. I don't know, kind of just feels like, I don't know what that is a metaphor for, but I really, it was an accidental occurrence and I just took a screenshot. All right. And so the backbone of the book, Ghost of, works with these images, these familial images, these portraits which hung in the hallways of my family's house. 2 years before my brother died, he cut himself out and then put the pictures back up. We never talked about them. After my brother's death, they still stayed up. So it was like these awful specters, And it wasn't maybe till like around, I think approaching the first year anniversary of his death, I was like, okay, I don't want to be spooked by these images anymore and to feel freaked out every time I go home and walk down the hallway. And so I had my sister scan them and send them to me because I wasn't living near my parents at that time. And on this particular occasion, I just started I thought well, what happens if I fill in the blank? And what does that mean to fill in the blank? And then, so that's this first part. And then the next part, once I started doing that, I was like, oh shit, it opened up a lot of floodgates. And I had so much more to say. So then I thought, what happens if poetry could be the framework in the photograph that supports the person no longer here? And so then it became a triptych. So I'll read from this, and I'm not going to show it on the screen while I read it, mostly because a lot of this writing has to do with sound and soundlessness, and who makes sounds, who doesn't get to make sound anymore, and how silent are the dead anyway. So I'll read from the triptych, and then we'll move on to some other work. Triptych. With eyes closed, he waits for his body to do the same. A fistful of grains, rice let go from the hand of the symbolist. First, the rainstorm, then trio of crickets, a stream, then a trickle, like someone who has the hands of a mother or father to guide him. But the house is empty. He is emptying out every hour, all hours before his death. He is dangerously close to living. His body is warm, his mind cool. What are the tricks for warming? He no longer feels the watch against his wrist. He no longer feels a wrist. He no longer. What may exist between appearance and disappearance, between sound and silence, as something that is nearly nothing? Slow music, quiet music, spare music. Of sound and form, I fell asleep tonight after feeding us both. It was hard to think of you cold. It was hard to think you. It was hard to think of you. It was hard to think. Well, I slept soundful. The wind howled and wet its whistling teeth. It has sound but no form. What has a form but no sound? There is no sound for everyone. Not everyone has a sound. There is no sound, for there is no sound, for there everyone is there, anyone between the sound and the silence, some solitary figure ambling along the loop. No sound in which the performer is silent. He is appointed. Parting, no sound overtaking sound to the verge of vanishing. No sound, not one, no one silhouetted against the empty scores, no duration to mark, but still a space to occupy an occupation. Tonight I fed you first, then myself, then fell asleep. We have departed from the cage. That is not a space we occupy. A sister who is dreaming becomes a sister in another dream, momentarily forgetting that music is playing. Something startled me. A voice in the room I thought was empty. Did you jump over? Or did you jump back, over and back? Did you jump? Did you jump back? Did you? Over here, I stretch the replay across the year and longer. It keeps me alive. It keeps me alive. It keeps alive. It keeps me alive. It keeps me. So it became a new ritual, actually. So every year on the anniversary of my brother's death, I revisit the archives, these pictures, right? Like that he left behind, where he's no longer in them. And then one particular year, I was really struck like what he didn't cut out, like what part of him is still here. So like here we have like a little bit of his hand and parts of his little like baby shoe. I couldn't stop thinking about that. So, and then I thought like, well, who else is still, like what else is still here, right? There's my mother, my sister, myself, versions of us that don't exist anymore. And I just started to kind of write within those bodies that I don't recognize, like in the way I don't recognize me, right? And this actually dovetails with the request from Mika about she has no masters, because during the pandemic, I can't remember, maybe it was actually right before the pandemic, I led an exercise with a collective for folks to work with problematic photographs, right? Emotionally resonant photographs, oftentimes familial photographs. We did this like radical empathy thing where they cut out painful parts of the photograph, and then they wrote into the spaces, and then like I kind of formulated them into kind of these text bodies, which ended up being an exhibit for She Who Has No Masters in Salt Lake City. Anyway, so but it kind of originated from this particular week. This is probably circa 2017, a ritual that I did. And so I'm only going to read, I think, the mother's body, but I just wanted you to see like what I've been thinking of, just to say like, even though you write a whole book about something, it doesn't mean you're done, Okay, so this series is called Beside, and I'll read this first page, and it says, Eshu. And so this is one of the children, but also with the bits of the brother. And then the little sister. And then the mother. But actually, this is another kind of one of those like, sometimes when you're making, you can feel like you can divorce yourself from maybe the emotional impact of what you're doing. And I was like, again, remember like the stamp, and these aren't dead bodies, but these are bodies from the past, ghosts of the sense. And I was like, whoa, what if I moved all my mother's children back into her body? So I did. Like, I just moved them on top of her body, and it made me feel so weird, and I loved it. And so I kept going. And so you kind of see the sequence. And it just got darker. And then I thought, like, what if I start taking them away? And then I'll just read the last one, which is my mother's body. If we accept the camera's record, let it be known how she staged each of us, every gesture. We couldn't say no. Photographs trigger ones not taken, pictures forgotten in our minds. She cannot remember what she has done. What did she do to deserve such wretched children? She knows now she wasn't meant for this, didn't mean to do it, any of it. Let her undo it. Let it be undone to her, to all of us. The war, how it foreshadows. I don't think I want to read this particular one, but I just wanted to kind of show you the next year, right? Another kind of evolution of the work, and also my poor Photoshop skills. So this is actually a happy accident. So one year I was like, well, what if I practice a kind of radical empathy and maybe like retrace my brother's steps? And part of that was like, okay, well, he cut himself out of these pictures. I can't cut him out. But then I was thinking like, like nobody in these pictures is going to live forever. We're all going to die, right? So in Photoshop, I don't know, I think it was like the lasso tool or something. So I started to slowly trace the outline of our bodies. And then I thought that if I hit backspace, it would just create a kind of like white space. And then for those who know Photoshop, probably laughing because I was wrong. When I hit delete or like the delete button, it actually filled in what I had traced with the background. And actually the family was standing in front of bamboo. And if you know anything about bamboo, like it's impossible to kill, like really hard to get rid of. And so I kind of loved this weird metaphor. Like, even though I was trying to remove the family, and then they become these like bamboo bodies, which are just going to never die out. I don't know. There's just something like unsettling, but also exciting about that. And so I kind of kept it. And then I started writing into the bamboo, into the scenery. I just mostly because I want to get us to talking if folks want to talk afterwards. And so this is what the piece looks like. I'm just going to skip over it. And that's what the final photoshopped photo looks like. And then the last piece that I'm going to read is called Tug. And I also talked a little bit about Barth's studium and punctum in our workshop. And for me, actually, I'll just do a quick primer for those who are not up to speed at the moment. I'll refresh your memory here. So the studium of the photograph would be like all the details that we can see. So the studium here would be like, there's a car in the background, it's a field, there's some kids, 4 of them playing, tug of war. I mean, I've redacted parts of it. And then the punctum would be the part of the photograph that pierces you, punctures you, right, for whatever reason. And that would differ from person to person. So here, I've actually cut out the puncta of the photograph, and that's actually the hands. And so let me give you a little bit more context. This is a photograph, 1960s Vietnam. These are 4 children in a family, my 2 older uncles, my mother, her older sister, and they're playing tug of war. But when I first saw this photograph, I actually encountered it in the pandemic right after my grandmother passed away of pancreatic cancer. And I remember I just like kind of hollered because I was like, this is hilarious. Because these 2 boys, they're playing war here, right? Tug of war here. But they grow up and they continue to fight with each other. And also, like, there's no small irony too that there's like a civil war going on in the country that they're doing this in. And these are uncles who battled each other to be better than each other, to win the affection of their grandfather or their father, my grandfather. And their rivalry bled down to their children, right? Me and my cousins, whom our parents pitted us against each other. And so I'm really struck here too by the factions that form, how my mother is clasped on the left around her brother, and then her sister is clasped around the other brother. And so there's a lot that's captured in a seemingly simple child's game, because I've seen decades of this play out. And so I was like, how can I not write out and also into this photograph? And then this is the next part that I'll read, and then we'll move on. Tug. Of a photograph, Barth's studium tells what has happened as it was happening, this one split second back in time. I travel back in time to return to a place. I've never been to a place which had to exist in order to exist on film. In my mind now, do I see the moment, the stadium, a field where grass grows far past my mother's young ankle, the rear of an automobile parked beside the boundary of trees. Upon my own childhood, 30 years later, can I map this terrain, the grass, the open field, children's bodies in motion, testing what their bodies are made of because they can, because it feels good to do so, to strive in this way. 4 bodies, 2 brothers facing off, a sister each at their side. These are the facts of the photograph. These striped shorts, plaid, smock, variations on the noses of my grandparents. Knowing what I know today of my uncles, these 2 brothers, I am both them as they are, as they ever were. That is to say, the same bodies they foreign to them, like a patient who upon waking anesthesia retains no sensation, and so she traces its previously could not have been known. Moved stretches, dead, these bodies dead, and people very much then now and yesterday, an evidence of who will die. But now, here in the photograph and present moment, they exist. But what strikes me is how they hold each other, which is a way in which they hold themselves together securely, so that the grasp does not come loose. 4 hands in contest held in 2 knots. To embrace is also to secure, which also keeps another's body in place, in time, for the time being, until somebody lets go or breaks free. Is the love of a sibling pure until somebody realizes they hadn't been able to see things all too clearly? And so the fog of the family lifts, but just for a moment, because when your country is at war, you do not have time to consider how to love your brothers cautiously, because it's black and white, isn't it? The photograph, the war, the decision to keep on living, even though you couldn't say why or what for. I cannot speak for my mother or her brothers, or that which had happened, that which will have happened by the time they uncover this photograph in the country where I was born, where they are parents of children whom they pitted against each other in proxy competition. Here, where I belong, I long to hold my hands around my brother's waist, as I did when he was young. Presence around an absence. I hold my hands, picture us in her embrace, in this space. I'll end there. Thank you. I don't know if I should keep this up.
Diana, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Wow.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
What do you think
I
about?
don't know. Yeah, go.
What did you want to take some questions?
Yeah, I mean, if people have questions, I also want to say, like, I brought up some heavy, difficult topics. So please, I'm actually really talk openly about this stuff, and so please don't feel shy. Oh, there we go. Go ahead, Asela.
Yes, hi. I just want to say thank you so much for this incredible reading. I'm just so inspired by especially your work. Especially I'm always gonna mispronounce this form wrong. The tritop,
Triptych.
Triptych, yes. It's just so amazing just seeing how it's all layered and how it works and just the way it's formatting. And you talked so much about grief and how your brother's passing really impacted you and through these pieces. And I know we talked about this during the workshop, but how do you take care of yourself while you're reading this book and finding ways to kind of just be able to write the pieces down without having to feel like you are exploiting your emotions or your trauma or or your grief? Because there's been so many, a lot of like poems that are just, we're so oversaturated with like so much sadness and trying to really stress ourselves out for art. And I'm curious from your end, and because I'm working on my poetry, my manuscript as well,
Mhm.
but I want from your end of how do you take care of yourself and how do you write the pieces down without feeling like you are exploiting your own emotions?
Yeah, these are great questions. So the first question about self-care and the second question about exploitation of one's experience, but also as it intersects, I think, with the family, right? The familial experience. Honestly, I think, I didn't know to take care when I first started doing the triptych, like the very first triptych. I remember I hadn't cried all year, not even at the funeral, which is not uncommon, like no judgment to my former self. But I remember feeling like it was like I was like emotionally constipated, and I didn't feel guilty, but I was just like, what is in there? Like I don't even know. And it wasn't until I sat down on that like anniversary and like I pulled up the digitally scanned picture, and even then, like that was still scary. So like I zoomed in a lot so I didn't have to see all of it all at once because it was too scary. But it wasn't until I started writing and I poured over the image that I like started to say things I didn't know were in me. And then I started crying. And like it opened the floodgates, like literally on the page, in my body. And I don't know what it was, like what it was about that process, but it didn't hurt, like it was like relief. I don't know. So, and then I realized like, I was like, whoa, the page, especially with like what I'm doing. And I wasn't doing it for anybody. Like it was just for me and my sister, actually. So that's pretty important. So I wasn't trying to exploit anything. I was just like, hey guy, like to my sister, I was like, I want to do something so these pictures aren't scary for us. Like we don't know if our parents are going to ever take them down, but let's, I'll share whatever I'm doing. So I think part of that was like, also letting somebody who's you're close with know that you're entering into possibly difficult terrain. And that way they can check in on you. But even actually, so I'm going to fast forward a little bit. When I first started doing readings, it was too much to like, it's so public to read the work out loud because it like would transport me back to how I felt when I wrote them. And that can feel like a kind of performance to do that publicly. And it felt icky, And so I think for some readings, I just kind of read like robotically, which I think is okay, But I actually learned, I actually do have a self-care routine. So now I actually, to prepare for some stages of writing, some stages of reading and talking about this stuff, I totally have a ritual before and after, like an intro and an outro. So intro would be just doing things that bring me joy and life, but also kind of like a contemplative mode and thinking about my family. And then like, I can't just come from like, I don't know, something random, like a concert, and then just like read. And then afterwards, I try to do something like really mundane and everyday, but also try to do it with like people that I love or care about. So like after this reading, I told Jay, like, I'm going to go paint some primer. I'm going to go prime a room, a nursery, like to cover up the awful yellow of the previous owners of this house. Other times I'll just take a bath, some wine. But the most important thing is actually like touching base with somebody in the present. So I don't feel like I'm stuck in the past in that grief. Like I'll actually call my sister now and I'll be like, we'll talk about something stupid, So that helps. And then also knowing too, like in the writing process, and actually even in a reading process, you have veto power. You can always be like, halt, pause, stop. You don't have to keep going. Sure, like you got to finish your thesis for your degree, but like it doesn't have to be that poem, maybe not now. I think that's a powerful thing. The second question about exploitation, I think, So when I first started doing the work, it was just for me, for my sister. It was playful and weird. And then when I realized like I wanted to put it together as a book, then it was like I felt really weird, like uncomfortable, right? Because it's like so public. Like it's one thing to write about your family, and then it's another to like put pictures of them in the book where you can't just be like, look at this mom. This is like the mom, my mom, right? This is like her face in 1982. Ultimately, I decided to do it because a book like this didn't exist. And I wish I had had something like this that spoke to very specific kind of like immigrant refugee family, a Vietnamese American experience. I wanted a book of grief that talked about all like the mundane, but also like the ugly feelings, right? Like I felt relief when my brother died, actually. And we can talk about that if somebody wants to know about that. But nobody says that usually in a poem. Not books that I read, and I read tons of elegies. And so wanting to actually have a manuscript out there that represented my experience, but also as an offering to a younger or to myself, right? And to other people who might be like me or feel like me or have ugly thoughts at times like me. And also I like really promised myself too, like, if I'm going to publish this book, like I really want to connect and talk really openly about mental health within the Asian American community. And I have been doing that, it became a kind of tool with which to do that, right? Like not quite like a social justice vibe thing, but it's just like, it didn't want to be about me, like, look at this thing I did, but I wanted to use it to talk about silence within the family, abuse in the family, and so forth. So sorry, that was such a long answer, but we have more questions. So it looks like the room has a question.
Hi, Diana. This is Lydia May.
Hi, Lydia May.
I just want to say that was really beautiful and vulnerable. And I think probably we all thought that in here. And I'm thinking about the whole time you were reading, I kept thinking about how incredible your delivery was, and how eloquently you read out loud. And thinking about reading out loud as well, I'm wondering, how'd you get so good at that?
Oh, well, thanks for thinking that it's nice and good. My secret dream, but it can't be a secret because I tell it publicly to strangers everywhere. I think with a secret hope that somebody will tell me how to do this. My secret dream is to have like a job reading audiobooks. Like that's my dream. I don't know how to do it. Yeah, I know. I think like I was like, oh, do I have to like take voice lessons and then get like an agent? I don't know. It just seems like a lot, and like I don't have enough. Like I don't have time, but like I want that job. So I think to me it sounds better than like academia. Okay, thanks. How did I learn to read? Okay, this is embarrassing, but I think this is totally formative. I don't know all the factors, but as a kid, I listened a lot to books on tape, especially in the car. And I'm talking like early 90s, late 80s, cassette tape. And there was this one that I was obsessed with. It was like the story was The Velveteen Rabbit, right? And my parents would just play it every time we were in the car. And I don't know, not everybody does this, but I have that thing where if I hang out with somebody for long enough, I start to speak in the same cadence and accent as them. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's almost like a kind of empathy, but like it could be kind of racist too, like if you're like, if it's not, the person doesn't like share the same racial identity. Anyway, it'd be like, anyway. So, but I think I did that even as a child, because I remember one time we got to the YMCA to go swimming or something. My mom was like, why are you talking like Meryl Streep? And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, you talk just like Meryl Streep. She narrates The Velveteen Rabbit. And I was like, oh, I don't know who Meryl Streep, I'm like really little. And I didn't realize like she'd been playing this tape so like over and over again that I had picked up the way that Meryl Streep intoned, her cadences, the pauses. I don't think I talk like Meryl Streep now, but I think I am an aggregate result of all the things I listen to, and I listen to a lot, right? Like people who are on podcasts, like that's a very specific kind of voice, the podcast voice, right? Like it's scripted, it's written in a certain way. And then when I write, it's a very different voice than how like I talk normally, you know, like to folks in a room, like how I'm talking now with you is very different from how the stuff that I'm writing. I don't know how to answer this question other than like,
I think you answered.
Oh,
it.
really? Okay. I mean,
Yeah, like the listening and the, yeah.
Well, the other thing that we talked about in the workshop was I do try to read it like sheet music too. Right. So like there's two things. Like I'm trying to read the space and the words, but that's not what you asked about. But there's another thing too, where like I'm trying my voice, which is separate from my like my thinking brain, is trying, like my body is an instrument, right? My mouth is like the speaker, which through which like the music or whatever the sound comes out. I'm trying to make sure that I capture like the rhythm of the line that I wrote. Because when you write, like when I write, it's in my head mostly, I say it out loud just to see how it feels. But when I'm like, you know, reading, performing, I'm a musical instrument, reading sheet music, and I need to make sure that the somatic experience is going to carry the syntax exactly. It's like my body is doing this weird dramaturge, right? Of like me as writer, but me as performer, and I'm trying to bridge that too. And so I'm trying to make sure my voice can do the thing. I don't know how else, I don't practice, but I feel like I've done this a lot. So that in itself of doing is a kind of practice. Anyway, but there's a really cool thing. What is it? Oh, sorry, really practical advice. I used to teach business communications. So I actually taught business undergrads how to give presentations and give speeches. Huge. This comes from sports too. You record yourself on video, you record yourself on audio, you watch it over and over, you listen to it over and over, and you look at the score, you make notes, and you revise. Most people are going to be like, oh my God, fuck no, you know, like, but that's how you hear. You hear like, oh, I popped my P's, or I slurred, or like I just didn't read the comma there. It's like I'm training, you know, like I'm training for the recital. But I don't want it to be like a practice performance. Each time I read the poem, it's going to be different, but I want to make sure that I got the rhythm right when I got to that part or something. And then there's this other thing that I saw once. The New York Times has that podcast, The Daily, and then the host of that, Michael Barbaro, like, you know, his voice is kind of iconic now for that particular podcast. But there was a little thing in the New York Times a few years ago where he and the audio producer talked about how many takes it takes for him to record, like, you know, like good evening or like hello, you know, this is The Daily, and then I'm like, just the intro, but like they play like every take and then the commentary after they do each take, and it's like they're saying the same thing, but it's not the one. And it's so fun to listen to. Like, what are they going after? Like, what is the right intonation? Yeah, I don't know if that helps. Lydia May or Jay. I don't know.
Yeah, it totally does.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hey, Diana, just to follow up, thank you so much. By the way, this is so amazing to listen to you. So last January, Poupeh, Dao, and I taught a cross-genre workshop. It was like so great. And I think I mentioned to you that Ghost of really keeps coming up during our residency. So this wasn't the first time. It continues, it ranks right up with Dion Brand.
Oh my God.
Third. But we did this really interesting thing where we gave it to everybody and we kind of asked them, you know, like to read it. And we were really trying to encourage folks to take a break during the blank space.
Yeah.
And you did, like, you're reading through that blank space, that break.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a break, it's like a rupture. Like the way it sounds, it's so incredible and impactful emotionally. I'm wondering if when you started working on these poems and then you started using the blank space, those sort of the sort of shapes of the sort of pictures or the cutouts, if then when you started reading them, if you started learning something about the poem, like if reading them with those sort of ruptures in them helped you think about the composition.
100%, Jay. Actually, nobody's ever asked me this question. That question I always get is like, oh, did you write the text and then put it into the shape? And I'm like, no, like I'm writing with the photograph, on the photograph, and the photograph is telling me where to break. Like it's not, it is arbitrary because like the T stops there because like the letter T or, okay, because like I can't, the photograph is no longer there. It's like a cliff. And that was jarring to write, right? To have that interruption of thought because these poems don't have punctuation really, right? Like they're kind of a flow. And then when I first started reading them, like I was like really new to it. And I just didn't read the space and it was fine. But then one time, I don't know why. Oh, because of Susan Howe. Like I was thinking about Susan Howe. Susan Howe reads like the jumble of like mixture of texts, right? And it's breathless and it's like she's choking and she's stuttering. We talked about that in our workshop. And I was like, what would Susan Howe do? She would fucking read like the letters, And also, of course, like we have like M. Divorcee Philip, what, like when she reads from Zong. So I was like, okay, I gotta do it. I'm like shy, I'm embarrassed, I'm not a performer. I gotta read what the page says. And that changed so much for me. Because it like when I did that, it transported me to what I felt when I was writing, which is interesting because I didn't know that it could be like the sonic embodiment would be a portal because I wasn't like dealing with sound explicitly, right? When I was writing, because I wasn't reading it out loud in the same way. But here's like the final part of the answer. It revealed something huge to me that was maybe unconscious, I don't know, which is when I'm reading the triptych, it's like it's got its rhythm. And even though I know I'm going to get to the cliff, when I get to the rupture, the wound, the cliff, it's like that moment in like a cartoon with the Roadrunner and the coyote, Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, where like they're running and then they're like all of a sudden the cliff is there, and they have to stop real quick. Like death is like that in a family. Like you don't know that death is coming. You're just doing your life, going out with friends, watching a movie, driving your car, being mad, being sad, whatever. And then there's like that rupture. And then you're supposed to like continue to go to work and feed yourself and shower. And you do. And then like you remember again that he's dead and that cliff is there again. And so like, I was like, oh shit. Like the poem is doing that. But like, I wasn't trying to do that. I was just trying to trace the picture, but reading it the way that I now choose to read it embodied my experience of living with somebody who is close to me that's dead. It captures how like you're cut off mid-sentence, like the infamous Sopranos series finale, right? Where it just cuts off mid-sentence. Because like, that's just life. Like, that's it. I mean, that one doesn't continue again, but like the poem does continue. And in the rupture, we do get like the sonic ghost of the body, but also like, I don't know what else to say here other than like, I've also been thinking a lot of, and think what we will about John Cage, but about his piece 433, which is a sonic stencil that calls us to listen to the space that we're in when we don't speak, right? Because there is no silence. There's just the sounds, the quiet sounds of the room. It was funny because one time in the pandemic, I was reading on Zoom. It was like full-blown cicadas outside. So it was funny because like every time I stopped at the rupture, you could hear the cicadas. It was great, actually. Because sometimes when I read, if people don't know the work, they just think that like something's wrong with Zoom. Anyway, that was a long answer, Jay, but funny, I never planned it, right? So, it's constant like learning and discovery. And then you're like, oh, now I know that. okay, cool. Like that's one more thing I have in my tool belt that I could utilize or not, or offer to somebody else. Yeah, thank you for that question.
Amazing answer. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the chat. Yeah, I don't want to keep folks. Don't you have to like go eat dinner? What's up, Jason? Hi.
Well, let's give Diana Khoi Nguyen a round of applause, y'all, and hearts and emojis in the chat. Thank you so much, Diana. That was
You're welcome.
a gift of a reading and a visit.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's such a pleasure. You guys are incredible. A low residency is so intense, you know? I know because I teach in one and it's my favorite. Don't tell my full residency people at Pitt that I think this, but I like the low residency people better because you listen better.
True. Well, it's just the gathering.
Yeah.
We're all connected.
Yeah. And I think also like you have lives, you know?
Yep.
Oftentimes like full residency MFA students just come straight from undergrad and they're just, I don't know. They're great too. They just have a lot of different anxieties. Anyway, I love everybody. Just, you know, everybody's different though. Oh my gosh, I'm just gossiping. Okay. Well, have a good night.
Bye.
Don't eat too many Oreos. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.